Well, let's pivot to this book you wrote, which is I want to say, would you say this is your life's work so far? Is this book this thesis?
Yeah, I mean, look, I hope I'll write a better book than this one someday. And I want to be clear to people. This isn't my own kind of defense of liberal socialism in the sense that I'm kind of offering philosophical arguments that are unique to me for it. Instead, this is what I call a retrieval, drawing upon the great Canadian political philosopher C.B. Macpherson, right? So I'm recovering a tradition that was lost and kind of presenting its core figures. But yeah, no, I was really passionate about it. I think that liberal socialism is a viable and worthwhile tradition that's worth retrieving. And I hope that people who read the book will recognize that there are worthwhile parts to it, even though, as I point out at the end, there are a lot of things that were wrong with liberal socialism in its heyday, and there are a lot of things that are wrong with it right now. And those of us who want to carry forward the tradition need to fix those mistakes.
Well, let's get to the first talking point. And look, you're here with me. We have at least another 45 minutes.
Mhm.
You don't have to answer so quickly.
Yeah.
I'm fucking with you. In liberal socialism, you propose a synthesis between liberalism and socialism, arguing that both traditions share a commitment to justice and equality. How do you reconcile the tensions between liberal individualism and socialist collectivism in this framework? Quote from the book: liberal socialism is an attempt to preserve the moral core of liberalism, its respect for individual freedom and autonomy, while addressing the inequalities and systemic injustices that are often left unchallenged by liberal thought.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it really leads to really the philosophical heart of the book, which is this tension between the needs of the many and the needs of the one, as it were. So, one of the points that I make in the book is that, without a doubt, earlier forms of liberalism, what we might call classical liberalism, or to follow C.B. Macpherson, possessive individualist liberalism, were committed to this extremely individualist outlook on society and on human nature, for that matter. So, people like Hobbes or Locke, certainly on Macpherson's reading, posited a view of society as consisting of discrete individuals, each of whom was a kind of world unto themselves, and everybody pursued their self-interest in the state of nature and tried to grab as much as they could for themselves without really too much regard for anyone else. And Macpherson kind of very nicely characterizes this as a commitment to an acquisitive ethic, right? This idea that the point of human life is just to acquire as much stuff as I possibly can, even if that's the expense of everyone else. And I make very clear in the book that no leftist is ever going to have any kind of truck with that position, nor should they, right? It's a very alienating, exploitative, and anti-egalitarian outlook in some ways that we can get into. What I point out later on in the book is that we shouldn't take this kind of possessive individualist variant of liberalism to exhaust the liberal tradition. There are a lot of versions of liberalism that were very critical of this outlook. So, just to give one example that some of your American listeners might find a little bit interesting. So, Thomas Paine, right? Thomas Paine was one of the great polemicists for the American Revolution and the French Revolution. He liked his revolutions, right? So in the American context, he wrote a famous pamphlet called Common Sense that people like George Washington would read out to their soldiers before they went to battle. And Common Sense is a great read, right? It's very funny and it mocks the aristocracy of Europe. But for the most part, in terms of the content of Common Sense, it's pretty classical liberal in its orientation, right? Arguing for natural rights, representative government, a la the USA, et cetera, et cetera. But let's flash forward a little bit, right, to Paine's next really big book, The Rights of Man. Well, particularly in parts two of The Rights of Man, Paine says something like private property, for example, isn't an institution or isn't a right that individuals have, certainly just as individuals. Paine says, look, private property is a social phenomenon. And the reason this is important for Paine is the rich who have a lot of property owe a debt to society for being able to accumulate this much property. And the way they can pay that debt off is by redistributing an awful lot of their wealth down to the poor, because without the benefits of society, they would never be able to have accumulated this much in the first place. So Paine is a revolutionary liberal and Republican who's one of the first to argue for what we might now call a welfare state, quite a generous welfare state in the 18th century. And he really set the stage for inspiring a large number of egalitarian and radical liberals, and of course, socialists thereafter. And I use him and others like him as an example to show liberalism does not have to be committed to this very crude, possessive, acquisitive individualism. It can be committed to this idea that, to use, the Kamala term, we live in a society. We didn't fall out of a coconut tree, and we owe debts to society and to others for the benefits that we accrue from society. So what I argue in the book is that liberal socialists should be committed to what I call methodological collectivism and normative individualism. Now, those are pretty technical terms, but what I just mean by this is we're methodological collectivists in the sense that we recognize that we live in a society and that a huge amount of human flourishing is dependent not just on the people around us, but the social structures that we inhabit, including economic structures, which can very often be domineering. But we're normative individualists in the sense that we think that ultimately what's important is the flourishing of each individual. And I really do mean each individual equally, right? And the reason why I think it's important to be committed to normative individualism is, like Marx, right? We want to be committed to actual individual people and their well-being. We don't want to hypothesize about the well-being of abstractions, like the nation, over and above the individuals, and say that's what we're committed to trying to better, right? So this commitment to methodological collectivism and normative individualism is what I take to be one of the core principles that defines liberal socialism, and contrast it with something like classical liberalism.